Chapter 7 discusses the beginnings of the 19th century, beginning with the Revolution of 1800, as Thomas Jefferson called it, his ascension to the presidency in the presidential election of 1800. Now, why did he call it a revolution? That's a great question, and that's what I'm going to be discussing here in the beginnings of this video. The Federalist Party had dominated the federal government for the previous 12 years under the presidency of George Washington and then John Adams. The Federalist Party was in many ways considered by many a plutocracy, meaning a nation that's run by the rich, for the rich in their benefit, and then as a result trampling upon the middle class or the quote-unquote common man, right? Jefferson was a believer that the federal government was too big. He liked the Articles of Confederation in the fact that it limited the scope and the power of the federal government. Remember, when the Constitution was being written, he was a leader of a group known as the Anti-Federalists, which was this the group that demanded for a Bill of Rights be added to the Constitution because of that fear of a overly powerful federal government. Under Washington, with Hamilton's financial plan, the actions against the Whiskey Rebellion, the decision to side with Britain in the Napoleonic Wars, and then the John Adams administration that passed the infamous Alien and Sedition Acts, Jefferson felt that the government had completely betrayed the Revolution of 1776 and that the nation was on the precipice of turning into a monarchy and just not calling it that under the plutocratic Federalists. And so his presidential run in 1800 really was seen as, this is it. If the nation does not turn to the Democratic Republicans, the party that he was the face of, small government, individual freedom, small military, the agrarian subsistence farmer, states' rights, that the nation was doomed. And so this was an important one. This was the election. John Adams was extremely unpopular. Alexander Hamilton even spoke out against his candidacy in the election of 1800 and supported the other Federalist candidate, Pinckney. But the fears were real. And oftentimes when we have presidential elections, people are, this is apocalyptic. This is the most important election we've ever seen. Seems like every 4 years it's that way now. This was a big one in 1800. Federalists said that if Jefferson won, he would basically turn us into what had become the reign of terror at the French Revolution. He's going to bring over the guillotine. He's going to execute the rich. He's going to ban religion because Jefferson was not a Christian. So he's going to ban religion. Bury your Bibles, preachers told their congregations if Jefferson wins. He's going to legalize prostitution. All things French, right? And then on the other side, you had the Democratic Republicans saying what I had just said was like the fears of this plutocracy, that it's going to be a nation run by the aristocracy, for the elites, by the elites. And this was a major, major moment in the history of the nation. What happens is there will be no winner in the presidential election receiving a majority of the Electoral College votes. The two Democratic Republican candidates, Thomas Jefferson and Aaron Burr, will tie, neither receiving a majority, and therefore, per the Constitution, the decision being handed to the House of Representatives. And it being handed to the lame duck House of Representatives, which was majority Federalists that had just found out in November, in many cases, they had not been reelected by their constituents. And so they're sitting there saying, we can now decide who the next president of the United States is going to be. Wouldn't it be great to not let it be Jefferson, the guy that they hated, the face of the other party? And this guy, Aaron Burr from New York, he seems sort of like he could be bought. We could probably trade the presidency to him for some assurances that he wouldn't get rid of the whiskey tax, for example, or that he would extend the length of the life of the bank, or, and so there's a lot of maneuverings that are going on. And this is a very big moment in the nation's history. And Alexander Hamilton, who despised Thomas Jefferson, because Thomas Jefferson believed in the ability of the people to govern, right? A democracy in its truest form, which was everything Hamilton feared and hated. Hamilton knew Jefferson was a man of principle, a man of ideology, a man who would always do what he felt was best for the country, not what was best for himself. Now, he also knew that Aaron Burr was a man who could be bought and sold, who had no real principles, who was, as Hamilton called him, an embryo Caesar, meaning a wannabe dictator. And so Hamilton does the very heroic thing and tell his Federalist minions in the House of Representatives, and I quote, in the choice of the lesser of two evils, choose Jefferson, for the reasons I just explained. And sure enough, 1 week before March 4th, 1801, 1 week before Inauguration Day, the House of Representatives, on the 37th time they voted on who would become president of the United States, elected Thomas Jefferson to be the nation's third president. Jefferson called this the Revolution of 1800, as revolutionary in the founding of the nation, because it was an example that our systems could work, that an election that was intense and polarizing and partisan could end in a peaceful resolution. Adams stepped aside. He didn't use the military to stay in power, as some feared he would. The Federalists didn't assassinate Jefferson rather than let him become president, as some felt that they would. And it established an important moment in this nation's history, that elections are followed and that we have a peaceful transference of power at the end of them. And that's why it was such a big deal. Hamilton's bashing of Burr, of course, we know would then lead ultimately to, in 1804, the dueling grounds on July 11th, 1804 in Weehawken, New Jersey, where Aaron Burr will kill Alexander Hamilton in a duel because of this long trail of abuses where Hamilton really speaks out publicly in a very negative light about Aaron Burr. But more importantly, it sets the nation down a very different path. Instead of continuing down the Federalist path, the nation does turn to a Democratic Republican administration, where the whiskey tax will be repealed, where the size of government will be cut, et cetera, et cetera. Jefferson's presidency is known for many things, but I think most importantly was his decision to complete the Louisiana Purchase, which would double the size of the United States and allow for territorial growth and manifest destiny, right? But ultimately, it does lead to, amongst many things, in the Madison administration at the end of this chapter, the War of 1812 against Great Britain, which is oftentimes forgotten in American history due to its brevity and due to the fact that it really didn't accomplish much significantly when it concluded in 1814. But it is important that you look at sort of the legacy of the war being one in which the United States is going to become, after the Louisiana Purchase, then Jefferson's failed Embargo Act of 1807, the Non-Intercourse Act of 1808, beginning to see itself globally, internationally, that they're not going to be able to permit nations like specifically Great Britain, that was still treating the United States like a colony at this point. They're not going to be able to avoid these sort of international conflicts, whether it be over territorial boundaries, whether it be over trade, etc. And this is where you start to see the United States emerging from that colonial sphere of the early republic into a nation that at least needs to be respected on the international sort of arena.